too to support all of the seniors and see what we've been working so hard for the last trimester or so. We all really appreciate it, and I'm glad for all the support. Yeah. I did my project on something that's been really important to me and close to my heart for a long, long time, which is slideshow presentations. In all seriousness, this is something I've been, I guess I can just start. My project really started about 6 years ago, when I had the opportunity to join a independent, like a community action project that was brand new and being offered by Maya Burrell, who is also my mentor for this project, who's here, and I can't see right now. I signed up for the project because there was no one signed up yet, and I wanted someplace where I didn't have to talk at all and could be really quiet and reserved, and could just not have to talk, essentially. So it was a bit of a rush when, like, 3 or 4 months later, I was standing in front of City Council in Ketchum, presenting what I had found and researched about regarding exotic animals in captivity, particularly in circuses. And I'd go on to do that 8 more times at various different city council and county commissioner meetings, all of which I was extremely nervous for and never comprehend standing up and doing prior to starting the project. And myself then, the cute one, third from the middle, would be absolutely terrified to stand up here now, and I am still a little bit, but it's helped me with my confidence exponentially, being able to find something that I was extremely passionate about and be able to talk to people about it, and that kind of helped me grow out of my shell and become more comfortable in my own skin, especially public speaking in front of everyone. I remember one time I presented, I think I see Commissioner Showman over there. I hope that, and I don't think that you realize how nervous I was throughout that whole presentation, but I was absolutely terrified.
Fabulous.
Thank you. So, this is my thesis statement, and for my project, especially this trimester, I wanted to focus on the emotional aspect of animals' lives, particularly the exotic animals that are showcased in circuses and mini zoos all over the world. And I set out to discover if these animals have emotions similar to us as humans, and if they do, how we justify having them perform and be in captivity for our enjoyment. So for my project, I visited 2 different sanctuaries, one of which was Paus's, which is the Performing Animal Welfare Society. Paus's Art 2000 Sanctuary in San Andreas, California. It's about 120 miles east of San Francisco, and it is 2,300 acres. Pause was founded in 1984 by Pat Derby, who was a former exotic animal trainer in Hollywood, and if you've seen movies like Flipper, you've seen her work. And also her husband, Ed Stewart, who runs the sanctuary now. I also visited the Wild Animal Sanctuary in Kingsburg, Colorado, which is about 30 minutes east of the Denver airport. And yeah, they primarily have lions and tigers and bears as their main animals. They have about 50 of each of those, which is quite a big sanctuary and quite a lot of animals, especially ones that I never see in general in one spot. So that was a very cool thing to see. Paws is home to 8 elephants, 5 of which are African females, and then there's also an Asian female elephant and 2 Asian males. Paws also has a black leopard, 12 tigers, 1 lion, and 4 bears. So while I was at Paws, I had the opportunity to go on elephant observations, which is where you select an elephant. And while I was there, we focused on the 5 Asian females, or the 5 African females, rather. And I was just able to watch and track their behavior and interactions with each other all day long, which was incredible for me, and I was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I was very, very pleased with the connections that I saw between the animals, and to be able to see such animals as elephants up close and not through a circus or zoo is really incredible, I think, and to see them kind of in their natural behavior. But this is Tika. Tika was born in 1980 at the Toronto Zoo. She's the only animal at Paws that was born in captivity. The rest of the elephants there, or the only elephant at Paws, rather. She was the only one that was born in captivity, and when that happens in zoos, a lot of the time the mother will disconnect from the elephant and not see it as her own. So she was kind of very, I don't know, she didn't get along with any of the other elephants and didn't have a family group to have social bonds with and to learn typical elephant behavior. So when she arrived at Paws, after about 20 years at the Toronto Zoo, she had never stepped on or seen grass before. And when they took her out of the trailer to be led into the sanctuary, she stood on a small dirt patch for the first 2 or 3 days because she didn't know that grass was something that you could walk on or touch or go near. She also had no idea how to graze, which elephants spend typically 21 hours of their day doing. So she had to learn by watching the other elephants that she lived with at Paws to learn how to behave naturally. And those are all things that the mother and family groups in the wild would teach. And elephants, especially females, live with their families their entire lives. And since they have very similar lifespans to humans, they typically mature and learn things throughout the first 15, 16 years of their lives. So to be pulled, all of these elephants were pulled away from their families at very young ages, 1 or 2, and not allowed to be near them. Yeah, that's Tika. Here is Toka in the front with the longer tusks, Maddie in the middle, and in the back is Lou. Lou is the oldest elephant at Paws, and she's 53 years old, which is extremely old for an elephant in captivity. Elephants' life expectancies in the wild are, like I said, similar to humans, so it's about 70, 75 years. And in captivity, they live to be generally 33 to 35 years old, primarily because of the abuse and the restrictions on walking, and their typical behavior just lives them to die very early on in their lives. But in captivity, an elephant that's 35, 36 would be considered geriatric and very very close to the end of their lifespan and not of use to circuses or zoos anymore. And that's how many of these elephants came to be at pause, was due to their age, they're not as desirable anymore in circuses or zoos. Maggie in the middle is interesting. Maggie's family was killed in a cull, which is a very typical thing in Africa, where people come in and kill a herd of elephants and keep the baby elephants because they can sell them from anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000. And so Maggie's family was killed, as was many of these elephants' families. And she was brought into the United States and given away as a prize from a Charmin toilet paper competition in Alaska. And in Alaska, she was the only elephant that lived there after her companion died. And she lived in a very small concrete enclosure that was very hard to move around in and very, very small. So if you see her here, you can imagine about 4 feet on each side of her if there were walls, and then about 6 feet in front of her on each side was about the size of her enclosure. Since she stood all the time, and elephants walk very far each day in the wild, since she wasn't able to do so, her and every other elephant there, even the ones in their 20s, have developed pretty severe arthritis and aren't able to walk very well. So Maggie's arthritis was so severe that when she fell down at the Alaska Zoo, she was unable to stand back up and unable to essentially move after she'd fallen over. So after that happened twice, the zoo decided that they'd give her up and let Paws take her to the sanctuary. So she was flown down in a military cargo military cargo plane by Bob Barker, organized it, the game show host. And Maggie, since she can't walk very well, the elephants will typically roam around their enclosures very far from every possible part of the area they'll encompass typically every day. But Maggie, since she's unable to walk very far, the other two elephants rarely leave her side, especially Lou, the one in the back. I never once saw Lou while observing them more than 10 feet away from Maggie, and they all adjust their behavior to accommodate and help Maggie with her day-to-day life. When she decides to sleep, since she has to do so standing up, since she can't lay down or else she won't be able to stand up again, both the elephants will go on either side of her and stand and kind of guard while she's sleeping. Yeah, the social dynamics between the elephants at the sanctuary is very different from in the wild, and something that I thought was interesting. Since they all lived by themselves for a lot of their lives, they kind of interact more as friends and as as close friends rather than family. Family groups in the wild, which is how elephants typically live as, will be very physical and touch each other often and stick their trunks in each other's mouths to comfort them. But at the sanctuary, and partially because of in circuses and zoos they're not allowed to do so, they rarely touch each other. Just walk around next to each other. These are the other two Asian female elephants at the sanctuary. On the left is Mara, and on the right is Tika. Tika again. Tika and Toka both came from the zoo in Toronto at the same time, although they don't get along very well together, so they live separately. to address the elephant in the room, I guess. The poster board over there is actually about Mara's story, and I wrote a more detailed, not recollection, but a detailed story about her life and journey to get to pause, and some of her characteristics. Mara was one of the more I guess photogenic elephants. She had a lot of different personality, like quirks and actions that she would do that was very interesting to watch. And you can see there's kind of a fence around that tree on the left side of the enclosure. That's because they had to fence off some of the trees for the elephants to have shade, because Mara ripped out every other one in the enclosure, which is hundreds of trees. And I had the opportunity to see her pick up a full-size tree, uproot it out of the ground, and swing it around like a dog, playing with the stick. That was really cool to see. But Mara was also born in Africa, in Zimbabwe, I believe, and her family was also killed in a goal. She was sold to a place in New York, who quickly sold her to a zoo in San Jose, and which is where she lived for the first 2 or 3 years of her life. From that zoo, that zoo decided to sell her to a circus after a couple years in Mexico, which is where some of the worst animal abuse has ever been observed, is in Mexican circuses, because they are a lot less regulated than the US ones, even though the US ones are also pretty bad in all of their practices. But an activist group called Friends of Mara stepped in and paid for her to be sent to a estate in Florida owned by the inventor of the Nautilus exercise machine. And there she lived with 80 other elephants for another 4 years or so before he ran out of money and was unable to have them anymore. But her and another elephant called 71 came at the same time, and were both very sick and malnourished and not in great health. But once she was at pause, she became much less reserved around other elephants and kind of flourished into a leader. She is followed around always by Tika, who is much bigger than her and has no reason to be led around by Mara, but Mara kind of leads them in their kind of a pseudo-matriarchal role. It's not the same as in the wild, but a little bit similar. So while doing the observations, I focused on a lot of the general behavior and different things, as well as the interactions, and which all tie into the emotions. And I found, depending on how the elephants were feeling, they would flap their ears back and forth if they were feeling happy with another elephant's actions, or if they were kind of in distaste, they would display not aggression, but showing hey, back off, I want you to leave me alone right now. With Mara and Tika, I got to watch some hay, which is used to supplement their diet, be thrown into their enclosure, and Mara quickly picked up the hay and put it on her half-broken tusk that she has, and kind of stuffed it there, and ran away from Tika while eating it off of her tusk with her trunk. And when Tika came close to getting some of it, she smacked her with her trunk, just very lightly and accurately. And one thing that I was surprised, since I hadn't really seen elephants up close, was how tactile and dexterous their trunks are. And they're able to, and do all the time, pick up individual blades of grass that they want to eat, and then they'll kind of pull it up on their trunk and sort through it and eat the ones that they think are good. But every single elephant has a different personality in all of their movements. So they all, when foraging and picking up grass, have a different movement that's distinct to each elephant, and different ways of carrying themselves as well, and also facial expressions that you'll see them make. So at one point or the other, all of the elephants learn from each other and learn actions from each other. So at one point, one elephant stuck their trunk to a hose that sprays water into the enclosure for them to mud and put the mud on their bodies to protect from the sun and bugs, which they do quite often. One elephant found out that they could stick their trunk up to the hose and suck in clean water before pouring it into their mouths, and then soon the rest of the elephants started mimicking that behavior. The same with Mara and clawing at trees. The rest of the elephants started to do so as well after watching her. I also got to see and meet with all the trainers at PAWS and see all the training techniques that they use. And in many zoos and all circuses, they use physical contact with the elephants and their people in the enclosures with bull hooks, like hitting and prodding the elephants to do various things. PAWS has been kind of a pioneer for protected contact, which is where there's a trainer outside of the fence or the enclosure, and they have kind of a long stick that's called a target with a sock at the end, and the elephant will touch the sock with either its head or its foot, so they can, which they have to do often to check their feet and take their blood to make sure that they're healthy. They kind of pioneered the use of it and have been advocating for its use in zoos across the country because it is a much preferable way to train the animals without harming them. And they do so for treats. One of the elephants, Nicholas, one of the only boys, has like a obsession with jelly beans and will do pretty much anything to get jelly beans as a treat. So I saw him run through like all sorts of motions where he put his feet up on the fence for people to see, like anytime someone came by that he thought might have jelly beans. So that was really cool to see and learn about. At Kingsburg, I didn't get to spend as much time with the animals or observing them, but this is Tiny the bear. And Tiny's a grizzly, and he's relatively young. But he was found while all the animals at PAWS were either performing animals or privately owned. Tiny was found roaming around outside an elementary school looking for food. And once all animals, like large animals, like the tigers, bears, lions, elephants, once they come into contact with humans and like get food from humans or live around them, they'll always return. And like once they're released back, they will always return to where people are, which is often like elementary schools or parks. So he lives comfortably at the sanctuary with 3 other bears in his enclosure. The practices between the 2 sanctuaries were also interesting because there are 2 very different approaches to the same, solving the same problem. At Kingsburg, they have much more animals, but about the same amount of space. And they're able to have more animals in each enclosure because they feed their animals a lot, and that's why some of them might look pretty heavy. But doing that makes it so they don't fight over food and are generally pretty lazy and tame with one another. Thank you. So while the sanctuaries are really great and a much preferable alternative to animals either in private care or in circuses or zoos, they're still not ideal at all. It's not a perfect place for the animals to live, and there's not nearly enough space to accommodate how elephants would live naturally. It really restricts how they behave and changes their behavior a lot when they don't have the space to be nomadic roamers and to migrate from place to place and return to watering holes where their parents have shown them. And it changes kind of how they live. So at the sanctuary, they're kind of just there, and they eat, and they live a much happier life than they had before. Every elephant had been beaten or abused pretty badly. Every animal it paws had been abused horrifically before coming there. And they live really good lives now, but it's still inadequate. And since all of these large animals cannot be reintroduced into the wild, or nor have they ever been successfully, once an animal is in captivity, it can never return. So it lives to serve as enjoyment for us as humans. And there are a lot more of these animals in captivity for our enjoyment than in the wild. There are more tigers in Texas than there are in the wild, anywhere in the world. And not just in Texas, just in private homes in Texas, not just the zoos or anything else. But, so yeah, the paws wishes greatly that they could have much, much bigger enclosures and that they wouldn't need a sanctuary, and they want, once there is no longer a need for one, to be able to shut it down and only have animals living in the wild and nowhere in captivity. Another problem specifically with the tigers and lions is when they're bred in captivity, they're bred within species, so they become a breed that's not really found anywhere in the world, and their genetics are pretty bad, so they have a lot of health issues, and they can't be introduced anyway because of that. And they, I don't know, because then that subspecies would be in the wild. But also, like, with these animals, like, in the countries that they came from, they're considered as pets a lot of the time for the peoples who live there. If there was a sanctuary for grizzly bears and wolves in India, and they called up here in Idaho and say, hey, we want to release 80 grizzly bears into the sawtooths, or a pack of wolves, we'd be like, no, we have a lot of those, and we wouldn't want that to be introduced, because, I don't know, we do see those animals as kind of a nuisance. So in their country, like in Africa or in India, since these tigers and lions are coming into really close contact with people and elephants, especially due to their migratory patterns, they're killed often a lot of the time just for coming towards where people live. So it's not like they could, even if they could be reintroduced, there's nowhere that would take them, really. So yeah, they just live out the rest of their lives at the sanctuary a lot. A preferable environment to what they've been in before, but still not nearly ideal or close to how they would be living in the wild, or should be living. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank all of you for... Thank you to my parents and all my teachers and Nancy, and especially big thank you to Maya, my mentor. Thank you, Maya. Questions? Anyone? Sorry, I can't see who you are, but Nancy's hi.
I think it's really fascinating your journey overall through being at State School has led you from looking at this issue from the perspective of our human animals as entertainment, and how you could use legislative policy to shift and change perceptions. And now you seem to have taken it to this next level of kind of more scientific observation of behaviors to determine whether or not your emotions. So what's your next step? What's your next evolution in your trajectory of animal studies? It seems you're on this.
Yeah, I hope to continue to be able to study, especially elephants, in college. And after visiting paws and being able to be shown around there. And that was another difference, was visitors are allowed at Kingsburg, where this photo was taken, but not at Paws. So I was very fortunate to be able to come and like visit and stay there for those days. And it's kind of really made me want to like, have either a job or volunteer at one of those sanctuaries and learn more about the animals and do good there. One more question. Sorry, I can't really see. Back in the there.
Does the sanctuary actively seek animals to rescue, or are they just presented animals when a zoo or a circus is ready to retire?
Yeah, it's a lot of both, and both sanctuaries have different practices from one another with that. But Paws, if they see an animal and they have people that travel from zoo to zoo and assess the living conditions of animals, and then those people, if they see like an elephant or tiger in like really bad conditions, they'll talk to Paws, and then Paws will come in and either offer to take the animal or try to work with the government to have the animal removed from that care and brought to the sanctuary. Most of Kingsbird's animals, I think 20 of the tigers, and some of the tigers as well, I think Paws also received 20, were from a circus is closing in South America with the new laws that have been happening. And once that happens, all those animals come to sanctuaries like Paws or the Wild Animal Sanctuary, or they're sold back to circuses in the United States or other zoos.